I'm Glenda Ritz, Superintendent of Public Instruction, and we're going to call this State Board of Education business meeting to order on October 15th. We could have roll call, please.
Mr. Albert. Mr. Elsner.
Present.
Dr. Freitas.
Present.
Mr. Hendry. Here. Ms. Neal.
Present.
Mrs. O'Brien.
Present.
Dr. Oliver.
Present.
Mr. Walker. Mr. Watts.
Present.
Mrs. Wicker. Superintendent Ritz.
Present. If everyone would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item of business is the approval of the agenda. I believe you have one item on your agenda that was requested to be removed by Sarah, and that would be letter G, atypical appeals process. In addition, I'd like to just reorder a couple of the business items without any objection. I'd like to hear the appeals for atypical configuration and the approval of the schools categories before we begin the discussion on initiating rulemaking for school accountability. I think that'll be a good break, and I think that item will take a while. So I'd like to move the accountability grades up above that without objection. Hearing none, we'll move that. Any other changes to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. You have the minutes before you of September 3rd. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Oh, sorry, Gordon. Motion carries. A statement of the chair, I just want to publicly announce, again, actually, the Teacher of the Year, Kathy Nimmer. She's from Harrison High School and Tippecanoe County School. She's a secondary English and creative writing teacher, and she is a wow. So we are excited that she's going to represent Indiana in the national competition of the Teacher of the Year. I also went to talk about a new pilot. There's going to be a pilot of Microsoft IT Academy in Indiana, and this pilot is a partnership between DOE and IDWD Workforce Development to help Indiana citizens, both students and adults, obtain the basic computer and productivity skills needed for any types of careers. 89 schools are a part of the pilot, along with 61 Work One centers. So we're excited about this partnership with Microsoft IT Academy, and we're working with Microsoft to put out a joint statement here coming up soon so that everybody has the information they might need on that pilot. So we're excited about that. Board member comments and reports?
Yes, Superintendent.
Dan?
I just wanted to give the board a brief update on our turnaround review.
We have that on the agenda.
Right. And I just wanted to make a couple statements real quick in anticipation of that, and it really notes of appreciation before we get into the issue. I wanted to thank Tony Walker and Sarah for her work. We've been in Indianapolis twice, and Gary once, and the reception of those communities and input from those folks has been fabulous. I think also to create context, we ought to say that in each situation, and in Gary, I think it was said, we can't find a person who didn't say Roosevelt's better off. I appreciate the legislature's leadership back in the 90s, actually, and Governor O'Bannon for signing this law, the courage of Governor Daniels and Pence and Dr. Bennett, our former superintendent, for implementing it. All of these schools are not where we want them to be, but they've all been advanced and improved. And students who are in very difficult situations because of leadership on a lot of people's part. We did some intervening. We'll have some neat recommendations we're going to talk about later, but I wanted to create context for that. I wanted to also give you a report that Sarah and Tony obviously are doing their typical stellar job. The communities have received us well, have received some great input, and I look forward to that further discussion later. So I just wanted to publicly thank actually a whole string of leaders in our state that will not let children sit in schools that obviously could not work. So kudos, and that's why we're having improvement, strong leadership. Thank you.
Any other comments? We have one general public comment. Nancy Sears Perry. You may.
Thank you for the opportunity to make comment today. I am on the board of directors for the Indiana branch of the International Dyslexia Association and founder of Decoding Dyslexia Indiana. I am a teacher by training, a mother of 4 children, 2 of whom are diagnosed with a specific learning disability, commonly known as dyslexia. When considering the AccuPlacer memo, my mind turns to students who are dyslexic or who have diagnosed or undiagnosed learning disabilities. In a May 25th, 2013 article from the South Bend Tribune, Representative Baining said that when the ECA waiver provision was put into effect, lawmakers never anticipated more than 2 to 3% of students would receive them. They were intended, he said, for students with learning disabilities or test anxiety so severe it would be difficult for them to pass the graduation tests. According to that article, waiver rates from the schools cited ranged anywhere from 8 to 22%. The National Institutes of Health and the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity state that 20% of the general population is dyslexic. These are our bright Hoosier students who will be our future scientists, doctors, teachers, innovators, but have a language-based learning disability that makes standardized measures difficult. It is very likely that these students will need a waiver. Although scientific evidence continues to show that the greatest student success comes when we identify and remediate a student prior to 3rd grade, this currently doesn't happen in Indiana. Oftentimes, students must wait until they are 2 to 3 years behind before they are considered a student with a specific learning disability, the umbrella under which dyslexia falls. However, studies also indicate that less than 30% of dyslexic students are ever identified. If we are using a standardized measure like the PSAT or AccuPlacer to diagnostically determine remediation needs, it seems fitting to have a prescriptive remediation measure in place. We must ask ourselves, what remediation is planned? Who will be remediating? How will the remediation be delivered? What benchmarks will be used to ensure fidelity? Who will oversee the remediation process? What credentials will be required of those professionals? What will be the protocol to determine successful remediation? Additionally, by using the PSAT scores as a determiner for the use of AccuPlacer and remediation, we are now elevating the PSAT to a high-stakes test, and as such, it is important to ensure that all students who need accommodations get them. As a parent who just worked with my school district to gain those accommodations for the PSAT from the College Board, I can assure you that getting those accommodations was no easy task. The College Board requires a school to submit various psychoeducational tests to determine eligibility for accommodations. The testing must be current, complete, and clearly document disability and student need. Are schools ready and equipped to make sure the appropriate testing and documentation is in place for our most vulnerable Indiana students? I fear the current plan will negatively influence the future of Indiana students with learning disabilities and inadvertently limit them and limit the opportunities and diplomas available to them. I also fear that we are creating dropouts and are driving families to look outside of public education to address student need. Above all, by not identifying students in early elementary and intervening with evidence-based approaches, I fear that we are holding students accountable for oversight over which he has no control. I do have recommendations, but I will
You can
submit those.
simply forward those to us.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you very
We'll
much.
take those. Thank you very much. Thanks, Nancy. The consent agenda is before you. I have a motion to approve the consent agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Oh, I gotta wait on you, Gordon, so sorry. Consent agenda approved. Moving on to new business, we have the recommendation of lead partner for IPS. Teresa Brown from the department, I believe you have a short presentation, and I believe you have the information before you.
Morning.
Good morning.
So basically, after we reviewed the RFPs for each of the lead partner proposals, we had a group of finalists that we talked with. We asked them to submit a scope of work. And so what you received from me is a copy of the scope of work from Marzano. In speaking with the board staff, they were in agreement with us as well. And Marzano was actually the group that IPS wanted us to check into when they reviewed the finalists as well. So we are recommending Marzano to be the lead partner for John Marshall and Broad Ripple. For $150,000, you received the scope of work. Basically, they would be functioning as their instructional lead partner. They would develop a common language of instruction. They would assist IPS in auditing instructional practices in each of those schools, and then developing a profile for each of the teachers along with professional development to support improvement. They would then also be evaluating the programs to see that they're implementing with fidelity and that they're getting results. So that would be the 3 items that their proposal would allow us to do. So that's pretty much straightforward.
Any questions from the board? Oh, Sarah?
Not a question, but a suggestion.
Sure.
On the topic. I think before we actually consider this recommendation, I think that it's very important that we first have some clarity of roles and responsibilities of both parts, just to make sure that we do not have a similar situation down the line with our lead partner situations. Our contract needs to provide IPS and Marzano with specific guidelines for collaboration, reporting, general expectations, with clear oversight expectations as well. I think we need to look at a new template that better fits the needs of a lead partner scenario within these schools. My request would be that, knowing that the turnaround committee is working with public impact at our meeting next week, I would suggest and request that we talk through with them exactly what the contract should look like, what specific components need to be included before we actually make and continue on a recommendation, and that we bring that back to our November 5th meeting, if possible. I would like to have that background before we go down this path. I don't want this to be a cycle that continues with our lead partner schools.
Superintendent. I wanted to add to that.
Oh, wait just a second. So I'm a little confused as to what you're asking for.
I'm basically asking for us to hold this vote until our next meeting so that we can get some guidance from public impact. As long as we are contracting with them anyway through the turnaround committee, it seems to make sense to use their expertise in terms of some of the wording, the verbiage, as we continue through. I think a big part of our problem, and one thing that, Dan, I'll let you speak to this as well, one consistent comment that we hear on the turnaround committee is the lack of clarity and the lack of understanding of roles and responsibility. And I think that we need to be very specific and systematic with our verbiage in this new contract to ensure that we are not here again a few months down the line.
I guess I want to clarify then what the role of the department is regarding the contracting.
Sure.
Can you clarify?
Oh, I thought you were, I apologize. You're asking me to explain my request?
No, I want to know what the role of the department is in the contracting of the services.
I think before we make a recommendation on which lead partner we're going with, I think that the recommendation needs to include very specific details on roles and responsibilities, and I think that needs to be worked into anything that we recommend in terms of a lead partner status. So I'm just asking for us to have the opportunity to use the expertise that we have already contracted with in order to make sure that we are preventing this problem down the line. I agree that I think Marzano appears to be the best choice. I want to make sure we do this right.
I guess my question's not about the selection of the vendor necessarily to serve the role. My question is regarding the department's role in contracting the services with whoever we go to.
Precisely.
So I want to know that the Department of Education is retaining the role of contracting with the vendor.
I'm not discussing that at all. I want to make sure that when we make a recommendation that we have clear and concise guidance on roles and responsibilities. I think a big
Precisely.
problem with the lead partner scenario was that when there was a disagreement on the path to take with the services through which we had contracted, there was no clear idea of who had the ultimate say in which path to take, and ultimately that dissolved the relationship. I think when it comes to the 3 specific items that Marzano is claiming their scope of work would include, I think we need to be very specific in our wording of what authority they have within those 3 specific areas. Not to make it into anything more than a lead partner status, but if we are contracting with them and putting $150,000 towards this job being done, I want to make sure that we're setting it up appropriately so the job can be done. So I'm not talking about roles and responsibilities of board versus department. I'm talking about verbiage that I would like to see in a recommendation that comes from this board.
So you've reviewed what's already here and you don't feel that's there?
I feel like there is.
Because I think we thought we put clear expectations here, and I might have Teresa speak to that, but
And that's fine. I just feel like as long as we are contracting with someone who has national experience on what works in other states, I think that it would be negligent for us not to take advantage of that, that perspective. I'm simply asking for a November 5th so that we can make sure that they review whatever we have in place and they make any recommendations to ensure that these kids aren't in limbo anymore.
so you're asking to table
Yes.
until we have a review by the, you called it
Public impact. Mhm. We've already contracted with them, so it seems to make sense to have their perspective versus being here again in a few months.
And I have a second. So, any more discussion? Dan?
Yes. I want to buttress not only the expert that we've contracted with, it was very clear to me from our hearings, we put a lot of time in this. The board deputized us to go get some input on turnaround and takeover. Clarity of roles has become a big issue. One day there's an outreach coordinator, one day there's this role of the state, one day there's this role of the board. Then there's your lead partner, then there's the central office. And we would be mistaken, frankly, not to take input from school administrators working in very difficult, and that'd be superintendent's office, turnaround operators, not to go the extra mile to clarify this. And I'm glad we went to those communities, but too many chefs is the analogy I used, and you could get a pot of soup and nobody knows how it ended up tasting so badly. But collectively, there was a lack of coordination. So we've had one not so successful attempt here. We're going to spend state taxpayer money. I think we need the input that we've received and put it to use, the expert, and it'll make this contract better, I'm sure.
Is this something we can get to them in advance of the meeting on the 22nd, so there can be discussion at that
We
point?
actually,
We're
we have a
talking
meeting
about
on
November
October
5.
22nd with them as part of the turnaround committee. So it seems to me that it makes sense to have that conversation at that time, have them review what's in place here and make sure that we're on the right
Give us
path.
best practice. It should be quite timely, and I think it'll make us better.
So we have a motion to table until the November 5th meeting, and we have a second. Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Ellsworth,
Yes.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Hendry. Yes. Mrs. Neal,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien,
Yes.
Dr. Oliver,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Superintendent Riggs.
Abstain? Yes. David?
I have a question on the same topic, but not in relation to the motion. And that is, unfortunately, the TNTP situation did not work out with IPS schools. And I believe we allocated $300,000 for that partnership. And my question is, has that money been returned back to us so that we can reallocate it to other schools, maybe in January? So I'm looking for the $300,000. That's not my personal money, but I'm concerned about state money and us reallocating that money.
I actually can have my department address that, and it's federal dollars. So, Charlie, are you in Charlie Geyer, coordinator of outreach and the monies that we're talking about.
Okay.
It's a great question.
I only ask great questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Makes sense. So you're correct. So $150,000 was given to each school to be used at the school, and then $150,000 for the contract. The $150,000 that's been given to the school is still to the school. The school has given us, in a grant. They've said this is what we're going to do. For example, at John Marshall, that includes a behavior coach, professional development, things like that. The $150,000 that was set aside for the lead partner is still there. There's a placeholder, which will be for Marzano, obviously depending upon the roles and responsibilities that are determined. So the total $300,000 is still in play for the school. It's what's been granted to them already.
Was the authorization for that money based on the partnership with TNTP? And since that's been dissolved, does that money have any impact on coming back?
Sure. So for the money to come back to the department, we'd have to find an issue of non-compliance because it's federal money. So we use EDGAR rules, and so we have to find an issue of non-compliance. The assurance indicates that the state board would approve a lead partner that the school would then implement, and which is the process that is currently happening. So although TNTP was the original lead partner, that was obviously withdrawn, and you have a new one at play. So we'd have to find an issue of non-compliance, and then once that issue of non-compliance had been found, we'd have to have a hearing or an appeal of some kind because that money has been granted to the school already.
Just to follow up, I really appreciate
Yeah.
your explanation. It's getting clearer, but it's
Sure.
still not
No, I
2020
understand.
for me.
It's complex.
I'd like our board counsel to come up and give a legal perspective on the money. John?
You should go through the chair.
Oh, Madam Chair, may John come up and
Yes.
address us?
And John, you're going to address the federal monies?
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. It's not clear to me that this money.
Can you speak up? I can't hear.
I'm sorry. It's not clear to me that this money has been appropriated and expended according to law strictly. I think there's a question under federal law. A state has to expend and account for grant funds in accordance with state laws and procedures for expending and accounting for its own funds. And so my understanding is that there was money given to IPS on the promise of it entering a contract that it did not enter. And under state law, under similar circumstances, the entity receiving that money would not be able to keep it. So I think there still questions remain on that issue, and I think require further exploration by the board.
John, you are aware that the money has been given to IPS?
Yes.
And we already have a grant contract with them?
Yes, but I'm not sure that the board's intentions and expectations were for IPS to receive the money in that particular fashion, and so that's my concern, is that the board's intentions be taken into account here, because that's part of the approval process in my mind.
John, be sure you talk into the microphone. I'm getting signals that people can't hear you.
Oh, I apologize.
So it would seem appropriate that we would ask you as a board to take a look at this from a legal perspective and provide a brief back to us prior to the next meeting, and probably include it as an action item if you think that would be appropriate. So I'm looking at Bob to put it down as an action item. But it's not that we're trying to take money away from IPS. I just want to be sure that we're following federal law and state law.
Exactly.
And it is $300,000 that we could reallocate to other districts and to other situations. And so would that be an appropriate kind of request of you to
Absolutely. And I think the question boils down to what was the board's intention at the time it arranged for this money to be dispersed to TNTP, to IPS, and whether the board's intentions have in fact been vindicated here. Does the board feel like this money has been dispersed in accordance with its will as expressed at the meeting where this was discussed?
I would also remind the board that we already approved and have money set aside for the upcoming schools that may be in the turnaround situation. So we've already set aside monies for everybody.
As a policy matter, I guess my question is, don't those two allocations, the 150 and the 150, go together as a package deal? And isn't the assumption that the money is being spent collaboratively on the turnaround initiatives that are underway? And to have, so one of the partners spending the money before the lead partner is in place does seem awkward. So it seems to me at minimum, the money should not be spent until the turnaround partner is in place.
So would it be appropriate to issue a letter from the board, from legal counsel to IPS stating that they should not spend the money until this issue is resolved? Would that be appropriate legally?
Certainly. It'd also be appropriate for the board to seek the return of that money if it believed that it's been dispersed not in accordance with the board's intention and will.
So procedurally, how would you suggest we act? Should we notify them immediately through you that they should not spend the money and then wait for your legal opinion to, what's the process?
That would be fine. In fact, we've scheduled a meeting with IPS counsel today, and we can raise that issue at that meeting.
Superintendent?
And I would be highly remiss if we did not involve the department in this discussion, because we are the ones that execute the federal dollars.
Certainly.
And have to monitor them and have to be working within those guidelines at the federal level.
Absolutely.
Yes, Dan?
I want to pick up on Andrea's comment, and, you know, I want the students to be served well, but this goes back to roles and responsibilities a little bit. It's very much in my mind, and I suppose it's in the language. The board decided to intervene in these schools on behalf of the children. Their futures were basically being compromised. In this case, we decided to do a lead partner. There's one allocation of $300,000. There's two parts only in the fact that the school needs money to respond to the lead partner's direction. And so it's we had one motivation to advance learning there, make the school a better culture and system. So suppose that all the roles and responsibilities get clarified, and Morazano goes in there and they say, well, you know, good advice, but we've already spent the money. So we had one purpose in mind for this $300,000. Within it, you allocate it a little differently, but we wanted the lead partner to set a new direction so the young people learn better and go along better. So I want the roles, responsibilities, if we send someone under the board's authority out to the school from the department or whatever else, with turnaround school that we took responsibility for. Because the people, no matter their great intent, could not get it turned around. I want that coordinated. I want that extremely clear. And that would just pick up on Andrea's, and it's really about children and their success. It isn't about, oh, that's my authority, this authority. I just want that very clear, the purpose we did it, and the investment we made from the taxpayers, national, local, whatever, gets expended to advance our mission. And that's to turn those schools around and give those communities and the children in those schools a future. So that'd be my whole thing. Keep it mission-driven and make sure the resources are available to advance the children's learning, not whose authority or who gets the power or who gets the money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is HEA 1005 Guidance for Accuplacer for 2014-15. You have the information before you. Michelle Walker from the department is here if you have questions. Any questions for Michelle? Yes, Brad? Oh, did you want me to have her do a presentation?
I didn't know if we were going to move it and then discuss, or if...
Sure.
I'm glad to ask a question now.
I can do an
Right.
intro.
We can ask questions.
So just as a quick reminder, the board is already aware that AccuPlacer serves as the assessment that meets the requirements of IC 2032-9, which requires juniors to, if they meet particular criteria, to participate in a college and career ready assessment and possibly receive remediation. It's the purpose of the board today to actually review the criteria, and we respectfully request approval. What we've done on the criteria this year is actually provided clarification for the most recent PSAT score, as that is one of the participation criteria. So the criteria has not changed from last year, other than to indicate what the appropriate score is if the student actually has a PSAT score from their junior year. Excuse me.
Yes, Brad?
This will probably be the easiest question you get all day. I just want to clarify for myself, we're only talking 14, 15 with this
Correct.
recommendation. And the reason
Absolutely.
I'm asking, I know it sounds like an obvious question because it says that, but with the assessment procurement process going on,
Absolutely.
there are pieces of this related I want to come back to in a subsequent conversation down the road. So I just
Okay,
want to be
great.
clear. Thank you.
Right, this is for 14-15.
Andrea?
I'm just trying to determine if we solved the problem that was raised by several superintendents last time around. So there are no sophomore scores that are factored in,
Right, the requirement of IC 2032-9 is actually for juniors. Last year, we did provide opportunity for seniors to participate and sophomores. That was a local decision as we rolled out the interim guidance. But certainly, now we're actually looking at what are the requirements of the legislation and making sure that we implement it just about the legislation now, as to Dr. Oliver's point, as we move forward with the RFP.
And then I want to make sure I understand what current incentive is. In the school building, does the College and Career Readiness Reward that comes as part of the ANF formula encourage more students now to take the PSAT?
The PSAT actually is not part of the College and Career Ready accountability portion. I think that's what you're asking about. Is that correct? And I would need to let Debbie actually respond to that probably. I don't know if you
Andrea,
want to do that now or a little bit
recommendation
later.
was removed.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then I have another question.
Sure.
Who pays for these PSATs?
So at grade 10, the department actually pays as part of a legislative initiative. At grade 11, that's actually a local decision whether a student pays or a school pays.
Well, okay, so this year we have the ECA to compare it with, right? But that will not be the case going forward.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
They can use the ECA score instead of the PSAT for the college and career readiness determination this year.
So if the student actually meets either one of those criteria, then yes, they participate in the College and Career Ready assessment to determine whether or not they need remediation. Moving forward, what we will do with this group is actually talk through, based on the results of the RFP selection of the vendor, what should the criteria look like? Should it be the same or should it be different? And that's actually something that the CECI team, Department of Workforce Development, Commission for Higher Ed, and the Department of Education have been working on.
I just have one more question. How much does the PSAT cost per student?
This year it is $11.20.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow, I'm impressed you knew that right off the top. Sarah?
That might have been the easiest question of the day.
Yeah.
Just a quick question for my clarity. Have we
Sure.
already approved the dates for?
So the dates will actually come to you in November. We have 3 more assessment dates that we need for you to look at. What we've been communicating with our vendor, we are likely going to start that on January 22nd and run it through April 1st. We know that April 1st is the deadline for any of those students who actually want to participate in dual credit and actually have a placement score. So we will bring that, our NICSIC, and our WEDA dates to you next month.
Okay. I get, my only caution there is that if they're coming to us in November and we're asking schools to administer in January, I want to make sure that we can get that information out
We
to
actually
the
shared with
schools.
them what
So
the
they know
dates
that's
were in
coming.
September
Okay.
and said that pending board approval. So,
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Is there a motion to, oh, did you have another comment? Is there a motion to approve AccuPlacer participation criteria as recommended by the IDOE?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Roll, any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Elder,
Yes.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Hendry,
Mr. Hendry? Gordon?
Ms. Neal,
No.
Ms. O'Brien,
Yes.
Dr. Oliver,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Superintendent Ritchie.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you, Michelle. Next item on the agenda is approval of proposed rule language for pre-K accreditation. You have the rule language before you with the insertion of a portion talking about the board's role in the accreditation process of pre-K. Do I have a motion to adopt the proposed rule language for pre-K accreditation?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion? I just want to make one comment, and that would be that I consider the freeway process for accreditation to not necessarily be a robust process for accreditation for schools in the state of Indiana. And I know the board, some board members have on a previous occasion talked about that. So I just want to let you know that that language is included within this section on freeway. And I really think that needs to have a robust conversation at the State House to really talk about what that means for accrediting schools. So for that reason, I will be voting no.
I
Andrea?
have a question. Once this is put into place, will these preschools receive A to F grade?
No, that is only the K through 12 system. So the answer would be no.
But they do have school improvement requirements.
And really, it's meaning that they're having a preschool program. You know, it doesn't have to be a separate entity as a school, okay? Did you want to address Claire?
Thank you, Superintendent Ritz. The pre-K pilot bill that was enacted this past session requires that accreditation for private schools come through the State Board of Education, and that was why we had to initiate the rulemaking here. And it's separate from A through F, but there has to be a way of measuring outcomes for the required longitudinal study that was put in the statute.
Brad?
Just a quick question on the number of public hearings we're anticipating on this.
I think the practice has become to hold 3, one in the north, central, and southern part of the state.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a motion to adopt the proposed rule language for pre-K accreditation?
So moved.
Or did we already do that?
We already did
I
that.
think we did that. We're in discussion. We're in discussion. So,
I was going to make the
roll
motion
call,
again.
roll call, please.
Call the question.
Mr. Elder,
Yes.
Dr. Graves,
Yes.
Mr. Hendry,
Yes.
Ms. Neal,
No.
Ms. O'Brien,
Yes.
Dr. Oliver,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz.
No. Next item on the agenda is approval of kindergarten readiness assessment. You have the information before you and the recommendation. Is there a motion to approve the tools recommended by the Evaluation of Child Outcomes Work Group for use in the evaluation of the pre-K pilot longitudinal study, namely the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, the Bracken School Readiness, and the Social Emotional Domain component of I*KR, with the use of additional components to be determined?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Yes, Andrea?
So do we know there will be additional components?
Can you clarify your question?
The additional components to be determined in addition to the 3 tests?
And I believe that referred to I*KR. If there were other additional components of that assessment that we already have that we might want to use. But at minimum, they would use the social emotional component.
But they could add more
Yes. if they
without coming to the
wanted
board
I
for
think.
additional approval?
Right.
Yes, and I wanted to mention that Megan
Yes, Claire.
Purcell from Purdue, who's the co-chair of this task force, is here today. If you'd like her to come up and address the board, I believe she's here. Is Megan
Yeah,
here?
if you have questions for her, I suppose we could.
I do have a question, since she drove all this way and had to park in, on a
David?
rainy day. You've set forth a specific set of recommendations, and my question has to do with the alignment of your recommendations with best practices.
Correct.
And what process did you use to come up with this particular list?
Well, mostly, we started with a long list that got to a short list of assessment tools that we were aware of that were being used, nationally, things along those lines. And then we really focused in on what domains we were most concerned about, which language is a huge indicator. Thank you. A huge indicator of later literacy and academic success. Social emotional was a big focus of ours as well, and then the academic readiness. And so Bracken was a nice match for the pre-academic readiness skills. And then since we already had I*KR in use in a lot of these facilities that were going to be participating in some of these activities, we thought that was a nice match as well. We recommended the social emotional domain out of the ELAC work group, and then ELAC requested that we say at least the social emotional domain, but then other domains could be used as well. Now, I'm going to be honest that we had some discussion having to do with the language component. One of the reasons we centered in on the PPVT, or the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, was one, its ease of use, and it's also being used by other research projects that are going on in the state, the Paths to Quality as well as the EEMG evaluation. We looked into some other options for that particular instrument, but they were having to be conducted by master's level speech language pathologists and things along those lines. And the PPVT can be managed by the teacher of record. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. These are exciting times.
Absolutely.
To focus in on early learning is really important. And actually, Indiana has been a little behind in this area. Many states have been out in front, so I thank Governor Pence and the House and the Senate for really moving forward.
Absolutely.
We know the impact of early learning on our children. It saves all kinds of other kinds of issues
It does.
down the road. And so having this put in place and seeing it move forward is really gratifying. So
It's an
thank you for your
incredibly
work.
exciting time right now. It's very
Yes.
exciting.
Thank you.
Just a quick question on the process, and I too echo what Dr. Freitas has said. This is exciting in the sense that having been an elementary principal and seeing the readiness gap in kindergarten, and then watch us trying to close that gap to get started on this. We are behind as a state. I'm glad we're catching up. My question is this. With regard to the pre-kindergarten readiness assessment, to what extent will data be able to actually follow the student into the kindergarten classroom so that we're not starting over again with another set of batteries on kindergarten readiness like we do in the spring when we're doing the all-call, where are the kids at? How can we work more closely with the local schools that are going to be receiving preschoolers so that we can share that information and hit the ground running rather than trying to repeat a cycle of batteries? This is not all that different from what happens in the spring when we do kindergarten roundup.
Right, absolutely. That's an excellent question, and all I can say to that is we are in the process of looking at kindergarten entry and kindergarten readiness assessments right now.
Okay.
And our work group will be making a recommendation in December to the ELAC.
I'm glad to hear that that's a part of the conversation,
Yes.
because I think it's an essential part of trying to streamline this transition from them, then from pre-K right into.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much.
So what occurs,
Andrea?
oh, sorry.
Sorry.
When, if they show themselves not to be ready for kindergarten, then what happens?
At this point, I'm not ready to answer that question because that's not going to be a work group responsibility as far as I understand, but they will be, I mean, as far as this particular pilot research that would be going on, there would certainly be indicators that would show up, and there would be a process if there's deeper evaluation that needs to be conducted or referral for special education services. I mean, I don't want to jump that far that fast because we're also talking about children who need time to get caught up.
Is it possible that we could see schools holding back students even before they get into kindergarten?
So let me shed a little bit of light on that. So first of all, the state of Indiana offers preschool programming for special needs students already. The second is the state of Indiana does not mandate kindergarten.
Right.
So therein lies the quandary. So there's no mandate that students attend school until they're age 7.
So is it assumed that students who go through the pre-K program, however, will enroll in kindergarten? Is that an assumption?
I honestly can't answer
The
that.
hope is that we're going to have kids ready for kindergarten. And what's the process by which we're going to have kids ready for kindergarten?
Well, then, a student who shows himself not to be kindergarten ready, will there be for each individual student some sort of intervention plan developed, or is that left at the pre-K itself?
I mean, as far as being a work group representative making this recommendation, I don't think I can answer that question because I don't know what the programs are going to be doing.
I can probably speak to that. That is within the scope of the Early Learning Advisory Committee to take a look at transition protocols and how do we make sure we're not losing out on the data that we've collected through the pilot, and so that it actually informs instruction that occurs for those families who decide to enroll their pre-K student in kindergarten. As the superintendent pointed out, it's not mandatory in Indiana, but I think it's fair to assume that if a child was placed in pre-K, their family will choose to place them in kindergarten.
Brad?
Well, I was just gonna say, that was the point of that question or the comment that I made, because the answer to Andrew's question is right now, we just enroll them in kindergarten. That's what happens, and then we spend the next 3 years trying to close the gap. So I think the hope is that if you're starting early with evidence that's gonna come out of this program, I would love to see us work through, and I'm glad to hear that, a seamless transition, because you can start intervention sooner rather than later, rather than repeating the cycle. So it's all good. I'm just glad that that's a part of the conversation, and I fully support what's here.
David?
Totally agree with the discussion on researching this as we're putting it into effect, and most research occurs short-term. As students move to first grade, a lot of the research stops. But there's a lot of research out there that's longitudinal on the effects of early learning on children once they reach grade 3, grade 4. And there's really great debate right now, because there's some research out there that says students who go through these early learning experiences, when they get to grade 3, they are equal to their peers who did not go through those early learning experiences. So it balances out somewhere between grade 3 and grade 4. Others will argue that the benefit goes through grade 3, grade 4, grade 5. And so I think we can take the lead on this somewhat if you put in some longitudinal checkpoints along the way, and also inform us and the legislature about what works and what doesn't would be really important. So I think this is a great opportunity to provide data not only for policymakers but also for the nation.
You're teeing up the December meeting discussion because the statute for the pilot requires the board to take a look at the RFP for the longitudinal study that is required in state law.
Always ahead of our time, by one meeting.
All right, thank you very much. Roll call, please.
Mr. Elster,
Yes.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Hendry. Yes. Ms. Neal.
Yes.
I didn't catch that.
She said yes.
Ms. O'Brien,
Yes.
Dr. Oliver,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz.
Yes. Did you call Gordon? Did you call Mr. Hendry?
I did.
Okay. Did he
Said
answer?
yes.
Oh, okay, I didn't hear it. Motion carries. The next item will be appeals of schools with atypical configurations. We have 2 speakers. Carrie, is it Dahouk? Not sure how to pronounce your last name. Dank. Thank you.
Thank you. Members of the board, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you again today. I'm Kerry Dank. I'm the Chief Academic Officer of Christos Academy, and I'm here to speak to you today about Christos Academy South and request that the State Board of Education direct that our incomplete combined K-12 school be graded using only the elementary school model, because the application of the incomplete combined school model unfairly distorts the performance of the entire school to the public. In August, you remember that we presented a scenario where a fictitious school was constructed using state averages in the performance data categories. This average school, under the combined complete school scoring model, earned a letter grade of a B, while the very same school graded under the incomplete combined school model earned a D. In that meeting, you remember that the board unanimously agreed to address this issue. In September, the superintendent asked that the issue be readdressed of the incomplete combined school model. Based on the outcome of that meeting, we followed the directions of the board to appeal the model, to use the grade our school is based on the atypical configuration directly to the board. That's why I'm here today. I'd first like to give you some information about our school. Currently, Christos Academy's elementary and middle school accounts for nearly 3/4 of the school's population. The remaining roughly 1/4 of the students are in high school. But the 10th grade has just 41 students, or 0.6% of the total school population. Why is this important? Because the incomplete combined school model uses less than 1% of the school's total population to determine the entire high school's portion of the grade. Our desire is to have our school's grade be based on accurate and fair assessment of the school that the public can understand, and that accurately reflect our performance relative to that of the other schools. It's reasonable to expect that the general public, including parents, will assume the measures used from one school to the next are consistent, and that the same data points are being used to calculate grades. When comparing an incomplete K-12 school to a complete K-12 school, that simply isn't the case under the current scenario. Just as the fictitious school that we presented in August received an abnormally deflated grade using the incomplete model, the very same thing would happen with Crystal House Academy's grade if the incomplete model is used. The most equitable resolution to this problem will be to grade the school using the complete data set that is available for the elementary and middle school, and a footnote that high school data was not included in the calculation, but is published and publicly available on the DOE website. This approach offers transparency and fairness while directing the public to the appropriate source for the high school data. As you'll see in the brief that we provided earlier, there is considerable data beyond 10th grade that is simply excluded under the incomplete combined model. Looking at the performance of 41 of 172 students in high school, while ignoring the performance of 72 students in grades 11 through 12, offers a significantly distorted perception of the school as a whole. Consider some of our accomplishments. Last year, 100% of our graduating seniors received college acceptance letters to four-year universities. We did not graduate any students with a waiver or general diploma, and 45% of our students graduated with an honors diploma. The statewide average for honors diplomas among graduates receiving free lunch is below 20%. It is further important to remember that the complete high school receives half of the high school grade from college and career readiness points and graduation data. In the case of Crystal House, 85% of our graduates earn dual credit, qualifying for CCR points, well beyond the norm in the state, but there is no opportunity to reflect this in the incomplete combined school model. The complete combined high school can also earn bonus points for improvements in English language arts from math in 8th grade to 10th grade, and improvements from 10th grade to graduation in English language arts and algebra. None of these are available in an incomplete combined school model. The abnormally heavy weighting in 10th grade to compensate for missing data that is not available until graduation is a poor substitute to a significant issue with the incomplete combined school model. If you were to simply reduce the impact of missing data, the problem would not be solved.
Thank you.
So,
Can I request that he finish, because this is the point I wanted to hear about?
almost done, promise.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. We would then be creating a special grading system exclusively for our school. And from a public standpoint, this creates a perception that Crystal House Academy is being graded by a non-standard model that was designed specifically for its benefit. That's neither our desire nor our intent. We do not think that the public interest is best served by doing this. We only want a letter grade that provides a fair and level playing field by which the public can evaluate our performance. The public will assume the measures and scales are uniform and comparable between schools. Using the elementary school model to calculate a grade offers greater public clarity than a model designed exclusively for Crystal House to compensate for the errors and problems with the incomplete model. This issue will be resolved for Crystal House in the next year when the high school has complete data.
So can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Because I heard a couple of recommendations in there that I was unclear of.
Sure.
So it appears that you're asking us to put 2 grades on the web to reflect your scores.
I don't think you can do that because we're a single school. So what we're asking is that we be graded on the elementary and middle school model, which we have a complete data set for, and a footnote that high school data wasn't included, and to encourage people who have questions about our high school data to then go to the website where currently only 10th grade scores are published, but it's available. Next year, when there's a complete data set, we'd be graded on the complete model.
So you're talking about going to your website?
No, to the department's website.
But-
The department has the Compass website.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct, but I thought I heard you say publish the grades that you got in the high school portion.
No.
That's what I
Because
thought I heard you
what
say.
happens in the high school, the incomplete model for the high school, right, becomes a measure that's unique to those schools. So if you go down the road to Manual High School, which is a complete high school, the measures used to grade that school would be significantly different than the measures used to grade our school. So what we're suggesting is that until you have a complete data set, the public can't look at that grade and understand that it's not an apples to apples comparison. And so until that point, which would be next year for us, when we can do an apples to apples comparison, that we use the elementary model, which is the complete data set to grade the school.
And I'll engage in discussion later regarding the topic. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
All
Thank
right,
you for the
next
extra time.
speaker will be Heather Willie.
Thank you, members of the board. I'm Heather Willie. I also represent Crystal House Academy. I'm a board member. And I originally signed up just to allow Kerry to have a little additional time, but I appreciate the board allowing him just to finish his comments. And I do just want to publicly acknowledge all of you for the hours of effort that you've put into this conversation and the thoughtfulness and approach that's been used by the board. It's really appreciated, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here before you today and to be able to share additional information. Kerry also has his remarks that he just provided, and we'd be happy to provide a copy of those to the board as well electronically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I'd like to call just a very brief recess, and then we will resume. It is 10 o'clock, so let's resume here. Well, it's a little after 10. Let's resume here at 10:15. Thank you very much.